Okay, welcome to PRS in Conversation. I'm James Bubar. If you're new to the PRS channel, please do remember to subscribe. You can like and share the video. Your support really helps us reach out. And also, if you haven't yet been to the PRS.org website, there's a lot of great information about events. We now have some events running that are discussion based. And the President's Lecture Series, for example, is going online, and it's trying to capture that conversation and discussion that he would have at the end of his wonderful lectures. You can register for events that they're starting, and also, of course, classes. And the bookstore is expanded. You can find a lot of things on the bookstore for gifts, for shopping, used books even. And also you can make a donation. But in any way you participate in our community, we really appreciate it. Well, it's a late night here in December, beginning of December, as we move toward the solstice. Very exciting time of the year. In Izmir, it's late night. And I'm really excited to be joined by writer Satya Indra, who has a long history with the Philosophical Research Society, and also is the author of really a great book called Letters to My Future Children, which I'm excited to talk to you about. So thank you for, I know it's pretty early in LA, so thank you for sharing some time with me to talk about all this stuff.
Thank you so much, James. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really thrilled to have been invited to participate. It's 10 a.m., so it's not so early.
Yeah.
And some of us who have children have been awake a while anyway. So.
That's right. You have, and that's exciting. People who may not know, I'm sure we'll talk about this when we get into the book. You know, the children's not just a metaphor in your title, but what is exciting is when you wrote it, you did not yet have the child, and now you have a beautiful daughter. And yeah, I'm sure you've been up for a good part of the day already. So
yeah. That's right. Yeah, we can talk more about the book in the course of this conversation. But yes, she was, or the idea of children was not so much a fiction, but an aspiration when I wrote the book.
Yeah, well,
and and the baby was here before the book even got published.
Yeah, and we'll talk about a lot of this. It's like your book is just pulling me into this. I want to start the conversation now, but many people may not know that J.R.R. Tolkien, of course, of the Lord of the Rings fame, he wrote, there's a book published now called Letters from Father Christmas, and every year he wrote a letter from Father Christmas to his children. And now it's available. Yeah, and he tells the story of all the stuff going on in in the North Pole, and the problems with all of the situations that arise, and it's beautiful because it just it's saturated with hope and the love for children to just want to brighten the day, so much in tune with the holiday spirit. But it's an interesting book. He actually did illustrations as well. And so you think about how he managed to make Middle Earth and do all this writing, and then once a year wrote this Christmas letter from Father Christmas to his children, and they would find it and read it. Yeah,
that's so sweet of him to do that. And it's interesting you mentioned Tolkien, because he's the first serious author whose work I read, who impacted me as a even before I was a teenager. I read. I can remember reading The Hobbit as part of a class read, and then later in the semester we were asked to read a book of our own and write a paper on it. And I chose The Hobbit again, and because I wanted to read it myself in my own space, and then after that, I shift. I did not know that the Lord of the Rings existed.
Right.
And the librarian said, "Oh well, if you've read The Hobbit, you should try the Fellowship." And I was, "Oh, I didn't know." Yeah, of course. And that for me was a pivotal moment in my life as a reader.
Interesting.
To discover the Lord of the Rings, and I read all three, the trilogy, and then I used to read the trilogy every summer. I think I read it every summer for like 3 years, because we used to have a 6-week summer holiday from school, and it was like 6 weeks when you're a kid felt like 6 years. And so I would read the trilogy. I can remember reading it every year for like 2 or 3 years on the trot. And it's been such an influence on me. And it's interesting you start with that, because only just yesterday I saw that the house that Tolkien lived in and wrote those books in is now for sale.
No, really?
Yeah, and it's this great big mansion-looking thing. It's not a mansion, but it's like a really
Right.
big house, and I presume it's somewhere outside Cambridge.
Yeah, Oxford.
And
I think it's outside Oxford, actually, but
sorry, I
I'm
beg your
not
pardon,
sure.
Oxford.
Yeah,
And so I love these little synchronicities that come up
yeah.
in conversation. You start with Tolkien, you talk about him writing a letter, and now his house is for sale. So I hope we get more of these little things.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into it because I'm fascinated with the form of your book. I think it's beyond intellectually why you chose it and what you were trying to communicate in terms of writing craft. I mean, it's just that image of a father or a mother, any parent, stooped over a keyboard or writing in pen, and trying to just communicate with a child. I mean, we can go into that a lot, but as you may have known if you've seen some of these conversations I've had before, I'm really interested in the origin story. I guess, to phrase it in Tolkien terms, the origin of Smeagol, right? Or when he becomes when he becomes Gollum, right? I don't think we'll go that dark, but all of us are really missing PRS. I mean, I'm very happy I'm in Izmir, but it's been hard to be away. So, yeah, if you wouldn't mind just taking us through how you came, your origin story with the place that is Philosophical Research Society.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. And like so many people who discover PRS, it's kind of it was by accident.
Mm-hmm.
I arrived in Los Angeles 2014 for film school as an aspiring filmmaker, writer, director, and so. I did that, and I met my wife. We got married. I'm still here, and I wrote in the couple of years before I discovered PRS. I wrote 2 feature scripts, and I was trying to find a break into the industry. I'd made and shot and directed a short film that won an award, so I kind of felt like I was on the right path. But like thousands of people in this town, right? It's a real struggle to get through. And I would, whilst I would write during the day, and then I would sit around reading and thinking, and just not, I would feel. I can remember feeling displaced, and a part of that I used to dismiss it because I thought, well, I'm in a new city, a new country. And it is normal to feel a little bit out of, unsure of where I am, but it was more than a geographical thing. It was sort of an intellectual thing, and I can remember I would go and my wife would go to bed and then I'd think of something, and I'd go and sit with her and I'd talk about stuff. And then she'd say, I really got to sleep. And I'd say, okay, sorry, you go to sleep. And this went on for so long. One night she said to me, you know what? You need to find a philosophy group. Because I would talk about all this stuff, right? That I was trying to think about, figure out. And so I did. So that evening I left the bedroom. I went back to the living room and I got my laptop and I typed philosophy Los Angeles into Google, right? And that's all I did. And I don't know after how many hits, but PRS was there. And I clicked on it and I read, I looked through the website and I thought, wow, this looks really interesting. And, it's here in LA and Los Feliz, it's not too far away. I'll go and check it out. And really, I mean, there's the origin story. I went along. I don't know if it was the next day, but, shortly after I went along, and I had a little look in the bookshop, and the guy that was in the bookshop said to me, today is one of the days that the library's open.
Yes.
So I think it must have been a Friday. They used to open on a Friday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it's just, just through there, and just, it's open. Go and have a look. So I went in and I met Kelly Convena, the librarian who's now doing so much amazing stuff with PRS. And she said hi, she welcomed me in, and she gave me a little tour. And then I looked around and I looked at the bookshops, and I was like, this is the place. This is it. This is what I've been looking for. And this is like, okay, all these, the mythology, the religion, the philosophy, shelves and shelves of it. And I was so pleased, and I was running short of time, so I started to leave. And Kelly said to me, "Hey, before you go, there's our dean is starting a new world religions lecture series on Tuesday nights. So maybe you'd like to, come along." And I said, yeah. So I took the thing. I went home and I said to my wife, "Oh, I found this amazing place, and they're having this lecture series. So I'm going to go." And I did, and I came back, and I can remember I walked into the auditorium, and I didn't know him then, but the president, Greg, was up on the stage, and he and I spoke about this recently, and it was a really, now that I look back, a very strange moment, because I didn't know him, he didn't know me. I've never been to the place, and I didn't know that he was relatively new to PRS too. But we looked at each other, and he just walked straight towards me on the stage, and rather than sitting down, I just walked straight to him.
Wow.
And we just held our hands, and we introduced ourselves as if we kind of knew each other, but we were pleased to make each other's acquaintance. And I sat down, picked my spot. I sat down. He started his lecture. And I knew very quickly that I'd found the thing that I was looking for. I was no longer displaced. And I went home thrilled and overwhelmed a little bit. I realized that all this time that I've been trying to be a filmmaker and searching for this, that's not where I am or where I was. And I emailed him. And I said, I loved that first lecture. I think it was on Native American spirituality. And I said, I loved that lecture. I would really like to learn more about what you do. And then he said, yeah, let's talk next week. And I came back, and I've been coming back ever since. And that was it. And, he and I have become, we're family now. And I used to sit in that same seat for a couple of years until they reconfigured it. But it's been one of the most important discoveries for me. PRS has, and it was instrumental in so many of the things that I've done. The book that you mentioned, my nonfiction. I've been writing a novel for the last couple of years, which I would not be able to have started without everything that I've learned and participated in at PRS. I was inspired to go back to graduate school with my wife. She went, and we left LA for a year to go back to grad school. And, all of that was a direct result of my discovering PRS. And then, also discovering the long history of PRS, right? This is an institution in Los Angeles, and I had no idea, and I'm very proud to be a member of this community. Incredibly proud and privileged. And it has this year. Sadly, because of the pandemic, we've lost the ability to get together on Tuesday nights, and it's been a huge loss to me, huge loss. And I hope we can go back soon, but only when it's safe.
Yeah.
But we benefited in other ways. We're doing these kinds of things online. Yeah. Greg's run a series online. But that Tuesday night was a very, very special place.
Yeah, and I think you brought up so many themes. Now that I've done a few of these that keep coming up, and it's this combination of, you said it wonderfully, feeling displaced, which doesn't have the harsh tone of alienation. But it is almost like a metaphysical homelessness, or a displaced is a beautiful word. And so often you hear finding PRS is finding home, but it's also a beginning. And yes. to stick to our Tolkien theme, which may come up again and again, walking into the library reminds me of Rivendell. Because you just had this adventure, right? They had this, he left the Shire, things were comfortable, didn't know how, and met up, and at Rivendell he comes together with the Fellowship, and is first amazed with wonder at, I mean,
Yes.
it's literal wonder at the world around him, and that's what I feel going into that library, because it's not just a collection of books; it's a beautifully crafted place, but to feel that the books were collected or they were donated, each one is a tome that has a history. You can feel it. So
Yeah.
it's an incredible place. But I also like how you ended what you were talking about, in that many people haven't been able to go to PRS, of course, even before the pandemic, and hopefully they will at some point, because everyone should go. You're really lucky that you're in LA, but it is forcing thoughts and ideas and actions about how to try to bring this more online. So whether it's, I'm really excited that they found a way to generate that dialogue that's so great with Dr. Sawyer, with Greg's President series, and then there's other series going on. I think the Peace Class right now has a discussion component, and that's exciting because that dialogue, that fellowship in service of something great. Whether it's so great about Tolkien's work, because each of the members of the Fellowship they're going through their own becoming, right? Whether it's Aragorn becoming the king, and Frodo becoming ultimately a savior figure, Sam, same thing. But none of it would happen without even Gandalf, right? The guy who's seen everything. He's got a big adventure in store for him once he goes into the mines of Moria. Right. And so that was so beautifully said, because it's home, but it's the beginning of something, and it's a return, but it's a start, and it's not done alone, even though the task is one that needs to be done alone. It's very fascinating. So I had to throw in Rivendell again. But before we move on to, I want to other geographical locales, you did get the chance to take, because I was facilitating a class that from Greg's materials on mythologies, which you were a part of. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, because PRS they're doing more classes, and they've really moved. I had Matt Taylor on. He started off this series. We talked about the philosophy and the idea behind what they're doing online as a school for profound and practical wisdom of the 21st century. And maybe you could talk about what's like that from the inside. Even though the class is kind of the older iteration, I think it's 2.0 right now, but maybe it'd be helpful for some people who haven't done it, what you liked about it, what you thought about it, how it may have affected your seeking or your work.
Yeah, I've been fortunate that I took many.
Oh yeah.
When I took loads when I discovered this thing. I can remember looking through the list. They used to send out like a monthly. It actually used to be before each quarter. There was a list of like, these are the things available next quarter. And the first time I received this email, and I looked through this list of the most amazing courses and content, and I thought, wow, this is everything that I want to do, that I'm really interested in learning more about: religion, philosophy, mythology, esotericism, and so I signed up for so many. I did loads, and I did, you and we did the mythology one together, and I've been fortunate enough to go full circle and actually teach one myself too. I taught Gods and Monsters earlier this year, or last year, I think. Sorry, last year I taught Gods and Monsters. But as a student, I found them so rewarding. It's just so easy, and I don't mean in terms of the content. I mean so easy to do. You just they log you in, you show up once a week at least. And as you say, you're part of this virtual community of students who are all over the place, and you watch some videos, you do the reading, and then it's just beautiful. It's like Tuesday nights, distilled over a lecture series, right? A course, and then you just talk. That's it. You're typing. It's over the internet, but that's all you do. You just talk. and you share your ideas, your thoughts, you discuss the material, and you just have this dialogue with your fellow students, and it's a process of discovery, and then you get to write a paper at the end of it. And I just thought it was a brilliant model. I really, really enjoyed it, and that's why I kept coming back and taking more and more. And I understand that that the model's moved and changed a little bit now,
Mm-hmm.
but that's for the better, because now
Yes.
PRS is offering such a broader and deeper variety of courses, and of course, there's no credit involved. The idea is just about learning and participating rather than acquiring some kind of accreditation or academic accreditation, I guess. So it's a newer, different way of I guess the process is evolving, and that's always a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think many of those older courses have been sort of repurposed for this new model too. So all of that stuff is still available, and I can't recommend it enough. I really can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I think what I was most impressed with as the teacher / facilitator was how much it. We can get cynical around online education. It's just just do the work, get your certificate. I was so impressed with the thoughtfulness and the intentionality behind literally every post. Everyone was reading with such joy and depth and sharing their thoughts in a very positive way that it was mind-blowing. How much people would bring to the text and bring to each other's comments, and that's what they've kept. And being freed of the academic calendar, now they have classes that can run 6 weeks. They're running all the time.
Right.
New ones coming back and forth, and they're really developing a lot of new ones. And so I think what I most enjoyed was that dialogue. I mean, we had people all over the world in our class, and coming from different frames of reference, but bringing I'm thinking of the theme, of course, of fellowship, but bringing a seriousness. But that doesn't mean the joy was gone, but a seriousness and a joy to share that. It was really, it's still going on. And in fact, I think they've kept that purity now and have expanded it. So people should definitely check out the PRS classes. I think they just did one on the music that I wish I could have jumped in on, but unfortunately I was a little busy. But there in the symbolism class, it's great. And
right.
And how do you think it shaped you as a writer? Because I love this image of, I don't know, your wife trying to deal with you talking about 8 books you were reading at once, and then you do find your way home, or at least to Rivendell, because you didn't stay there. Frodo gets somewhere, but he can never stay there, right? I guess how did it shape your writing? Not necessarily about the book, which we'll talk about in a second, but just what was that process like, finding this, and then how it maybe shaped your writer self as you moved into maybe, I don't want to say moved into new directions, but maybe uncovered things you'd always been thinking about, but now found a new voice or new avenue to engage that material.
It's a brilliant question. I think it's been so important because I wasn't able to articulate, or rather, I wasn't able to name the things or the themes that would pop up in my screenplays before, right? So this stuff was always inside, searching for a way to get out, and it was expressing itself in the screenplays that I'd written that had an overtly spiritual nature, or sort of a mythological feel to them, and I didn't know that's what was going on, but I knew that that's what I wanted to write, and that's what felt good, and that's how I perceived the world. And when I came across PRS, I was able to name those things. And not only that, then I knew that I discovered this vast body of knowledge and books, of course, and these seminal titles and authors and thinkers, and it was like being given like as you say, the keys to the library, and that's when I knew. I thought, this is all the stuff that I need to know and want to know, and I don't care about Hollywood and all of this stuff anymore.
Right.
That's not to say I wouldn't continue to be a filmmaker, but I found I found
Right.
the place as a storyteller that I wanted to live in.
Yes.
Right. Whereas and I really sort of psychologically positioned myself from a filmmaker, which I was originally very proud to say, I'm a filmmaker. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to be, a filmmaker. And I discovered, like many people do, that it's always plan B. It's always something, the thing that you're striving for is usually an avenue to the real thing.
Right.
And I found being a filmmaker was not only frustrating, but it was very, very narrow, and I found it very, very shallow. Because people would read my script in the industry and go, "This is really good, but it's not commercial.
Right.
It's not quite right." And I used to think, yeah, but if it's really good, who cares? and that's not enough, right?
Right.
So I found being a filmmaker narrow and shallow, and then discovering PRS allowed me to define myself as a storyteller, which meant I could be so much broader and deeper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean my stories can't be conveyed through the medium of film. But
Sure.
It opened up the option of writing nonfiction, of writing fiction, of blog posts, of essays.
Yeah.
And I just suddenly felt much more freer as a creative.
Yeah.
In this newer space, in this bigger, broader, deeper space. And so yeah, discovering PRS and the course materials and the reading just opened up so many places of knowledge to me that I really did dive, and I'm still diving. I know there's no bottom, and that's just the best thing, because I don't want to come back up. I'm in the place that I want to be, and I can remember a time in my life where I thought things like philosophy and were so out there somewhere for a small rarefied group of people.
Yeah, too abstract to matter. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right, and I'm not suggesting that I have become a philosopher, but but discovering the tools of philosophy, how to navigate life and literature and art has been so rewarding and continues to be.
Yeah,
and that wouldn't have happened without PRS.
Yeah,
and the courses.
I think sometimes people, when they think of philosophy, they think PhD, but obviously the word of lover of wisdom, and I'm not too far from its Western birthplace with Socrates and Plato and this notion about how to live and what is a good and what is a good life. And I love how you talked about discovering or claiming a language. Things were there, but now you were claiming a language. I don't mean just linguistically, but how you were, understanding or recognizing words that you had, and stories that you had kind of known somewhat, but now you could expand upon, because that's exactly what you do in the book. And since you're a Hobbit fan, I'll just give you the compliment of one of the ways to track Bilbo's character is his mastery of language. When he's first in these encounters, he is stuttering and doesn't know what to say, and then there's that one point when he's jumping on and he's telling his story. He's like, "I'm the barrel rider. And he's become this really. It's a great way to track his kind of mastery as he goes on this adventure in The Hobbit. But again, we're getting I don't think you can ever get off track with Tolkien. We're always on track. But I do want to get
just
to the book.
yeah, no, I think it's astonishing that you started with Tolkien. It really is, because that's, like I said, that's where I start with Tolkien, and now just right now having this conversation, I realize that all of these things that I just said that I wasn't able to name, that I didn't realize, of course, originate from Tolkien, right? From when I was that 10-year-old kid.
Yeah.
They've always been there, but they were, inside of me that I'd absorbed back then, and it's no surprise that that's where I feel I belong.
Yeah,
and it's really interesting to have finally found my place back there.
Yeah, and he's so obvious. He was in one poll, I think, at the turn of millennia, at the millennium. They did a bunch of polls about best novels of the 20th century. His was number 2. In one of the polls I checked, and I think Anna Karenina was 9 by Tolstoy or something like that, and I think it was there was a book called Author of the Century by the great Tolkien scholar Thomas Shippey, I believe, and he was voted most popular author of the century, but that doesn't mean he wasn't visionary. Connecting into the imaginal realm with these stories that connect, that are our stories, like the great myths, and like your work, which we'll talk about. But before we get there, I just want to touch on quickly, because last time I saw you was in another hallowed part of PRS. We were in the president's office, and which is another realm of wonders, and you were telling me how you were applying for grad school and then going off. I think you did art history or something. And that's, again, seems like, that's why I think the Rivendell metaphor is good, because you were there for a while, but then, so I think now as people are dealing with, what do I do? Everything's gone crazy. Everything's upside down. And I like to hear stories from people who took that literal in different direction. I'm sure you thought about it. It wasn't, not thought out, but that struck me as much as I thought I knew you from our class and I knew of your journey already. That was another realm, another path on the adventure. So maybe a little bit about what that decision went into, what that experience was like, going to grad school late. A lot of people are a little hesitant to do it, making themselves vulnerable. And now there's so many courses, grad schools online. It's never been easier to do. So maybe that'd be interesting to hear from you about.
Yeah, sure. Well, it was, again, PRS was a launch pad for that. Finding PRS and attending that world religions was, I had to miss, I think, 2 of them, because in between my wife and I, we went to visit London. So I missed a couple of those, but it was so instrumental in I said I was displaced in placing me where I needed to be, right? And, just the idea of world religions, when you think about how all-encompassing that can be, and it showed me that this world religion and all the philosophies that come with it is where I belong. Not here, not there, not in this tradition or that tradition, but all of them. This is where I want to be. And it was so inspiring and so motivating that I knew that I had to do more and really find my way into this place as a career, as a writer, more beyond us being a screenwriter. And so, and I applied. I looked for a bunch of courses, and I found this course in King's College London, which is a brilliant university, extremely well respected around the world.
Yeah.
And I found Christianity and the Arts, an MA, and I thought this sounds like this might be the thing for me, and it was. And so I applied. I got in, and I said to my wife, "Well, I'm in. Right? What do we do?" And she said, I would love to go to London. My wife's an Angelino. She's lived here her entire life. And she said, I would love to go and, spend some time in London, a year or whatever. And she has her own amazing story, which we can talk about, which you're a little bit familiar with. But she's an engineer by training and a graduate of UCLA. She did grad school at Berkeley. She'd worked as a management consultant for 20 years. And all she ever wanted to do was psychology. and 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 she would talk to me about, going back to school to do that thing that she's always loved and it was extremely well read in, but didn't do as a career. And when I got into King's, I said to her, well, what if you did something too? And she said, that would be crazy. And I said, well, let's try. And so she did. And so, we applied very, very sort of off the cuff. And she applied to the London School of Economics for a master's, for her second master's degree in organizational psychology. And we waited for weeks and weeks and weeks, and she got in.
Wow.
And this was an amazing time for us. And so I got in, and so I originally graduated from business school. So, I had already done a graduate degree in marketing and had a long career before I, decided to become a filmmaker. And so she was doing the same. She was making this kind of switch, and we both got accepted, and we knew that the universe was telling us, like, this is a thing. You got to go do this. And so we went for a year, and she went to the London School of Economics. The campuses were like literally next door.
Oh yeah, I know them well. They're and for people who haven't been there, it's almost unfair because you're not too far away from so many of the amazing things that make London, new and old. Yeah. And the people,
everything is there.
The people, whether it's in your program or not, it's just such a bastion for, just the diversity and the languages and the intellectual talent and just that energy that only campuses like that in a big city can bring in terms of, speakers and people doing stuff, reading stuff. That's amazing.
Yeah. So we went, she took a sabbatical from work. We sold our apartment. We put everything in storage. We moved to London. I finally went back because I hadn't been back since I first came to LA, and I returned back to my old neighborhood. We rented an apartment in my old neighborhood, and it was really strange to be back there with as a married man with a wife, back at school, and being a student in London is an incredible experience. It's an amazing experience.
Yes.
And whilst we were there, we also had our baby. We had it was just a phenomenal year, and we were back within 10 months, I think, 9-10 months.
Right.
And we'd gone and we'd sort of changed our lives. So we'd had this amazing adventure, and PRS was instrumental in that.
Did you end up writing, when you were getting ready to go, the conversation we were having was iconography and icons in Christian art, which I think is what led you towards the program. So I'm curious if that's what you ended up diving into, or did you make some newer connections, like for the thesis or for your focus?
Yeah, it's a good question. And you know what? My dissertation I wrote on a painting by Caravaggio. And now you're going to ask me what it was called. It's the Madonna of something, of somewhere. I can't remember, but
don't worry. That's what Google's for. People could look it up.
Yeah.
Caravaggio has a lot of paintings. So even looking up Caravaggio, even if it takes a while to find it, or they find something else may be interesting, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry about
it. And it's an amazing painting because it's a picture of the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus stood on the threshold of a church. And there are a pair of pilgrims on their knees before, and they're sort of looking up, hands together. The Son of God and his mother. And for me, I looked at it, and because I'd been introduced to things from PRS, what I saw was this mythological stuff going on, right? And that, so that my dissertation was a little bit of art history, but more of that, right? And
Continuing.
they wanted more of the art history,
Right.
And less of the mythology, less of the the esoteric stuff.
Yeah.
But this is sort of emblematic of who I am and was and searching to be, right? I wasn't particularly interested in the traditional art history of that Caravaggio painting, right? Whilst I did cover it, I was much more interested in the fact that the pilgrims were stood sort of kneeling before the threshold, which is a liminal space, right? And all of the mythological stuff that's going on in that painting.
Yeah.
And so that's what I ended up writing about. And the feedback was I passed and I got my degree, but the feedback was very clearly you needed to focus more on the art history and leave all of that other stuff.
More scholarship, less
yes,
esoteric interpretation and revelation.
Right, and I was like, yes, now I know where I want to be because it's not there. But it's a beautiful painting, and if I can remember the name, I will tell you. And if you just to look at it, you can see if you're that way inclined, you can see that there is so much happening. And Caravaggio is an amazing artist, an incredible artist, and he knew exactly what he was doing in that moment with that painting.
Yeah, and it's timeless. So things are working through the artist in the same way. We talked about Tolkien being in touch with the imaginal realm or the visionary aspect of the artist, where eternal themes are coming through. You'll appreciate this Caravaggio story. I was in Italy, I was in Rome, and I was in the Piazza del Popolo, and I walked into this little church, very, very small, and I was the only one in there, and I didn't know it, but it has a Caravaggio. It has
really?
Caravaggio. I think it's the one with Peter being crucified upside down.
Oh,
and it's
God,
huge,
it's amazing.
Yeah,
they're massive.
Yeah, so I walked in just because it was right next to the Piazza del Popolo, the square, a big square in Rome, not as big as like St. Peter's, but a typical square you find in around Rome, and it's just a beautiful church. So I walked in, and then I'm face to face by myself in this space with that painting, and I remember mumbling, I was like, "This is all of us." And then I just walked back outside and back into the tourist world, and people selling postcards, and I don't know if it's still there, but he's amazing. I just want to thank you for that story, because it's one benefit. I don't know if it's a benefit. It's just the light seeping through the cracks in our world, I guess, is that people can do these things less expensively. They can even stay at their, a job, or they can stay in their location and take journeys like this that involve intellectual, or that's a little too narrow of a term, because I think it's more of a edification of the soul that you were seeking.
Right.
That you can find these things, whether through PRS, and I think if there's any hope during these times of upheaval, is to try to see possibilities as our individual worlds have been kind of thrown in darkness, and the larger one, there's a lot of uncertainty. So I love that you shared that story. That's just great about that. I could imagine you having that conversation with your wife, and the next thing 4 or 5 months later, you're like in London. But you can still do that. You can still do that even if we can't get to London right now, and that's an important story. And I love how you talked about how it shaped your work. So let's get on to your work, and I have an invocation.
I've just looked it up, and it's the Madonna di Loreto.
Oh, okay.
Also known as the Madonna of the Pilgrims, and it's reminded me now quickly that the story is that this house that she was stood on the threshold of was actually the mythological story is that this is the actual house that was magically transported from I think it was Nazareth to Italy, right? There's this whole mythology behind this house, right? Wow. And I find it strange that you can have, and it's an actual building. It's there. You can still go and see it. And Caravaggio just took that story and made this beautiful painting from it.
Yeah.
And I just find it strange that that aspect, which is a fantastical story, right? For an actual house to transport
Right.
thousands of miles. So you can believe it or you can disregard it, but that's the story that comes with the painting.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it like that academically that it can be dismissed,
Mm-hmm.
right? That part of it, and
Mm-hmm.
you can the idea is let's just focus on the brushstrokes and let's just focus on what is happening here in a scholarly sense, and let's not worry too much about that mythological stuff.
Right.
And I find that bizarre because without that mythological foundation, there is no painting.
Yeah. Yeah. What made him want to tell this story? Him through words, but it's that kind of that extreme, that negation principle of skepticism, like, well, that didn't happen, or, oh, that's just a myth, or, oh, that's untrue, and that's so much less interesting than aspects of experiential revelation and understanding,
Right.
that these stories are trying to get us to experience, I guess.
Right.
Sounds a little
Yeah,
awkward,
right.
but you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
we're gonna, if you don't mind, we're gonna talk for a little bit about your book, Letters to My Future Children, which is on Amazon, but it's also, I believe, on the PRS.org website. So to pick up a copy, it would be great to go to PRS.org. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, and we'll talk about it in a second. But I have an invocation that I think you'll like, because your theme of the perspective of the soul. In the story that you're telling, in an intimate letter to everybody, to yourself, but also to, of course, to your future children. So I don't know if you know this quote, but I'll start it off and then I'll tell you where it's from. It goes like this: My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak. I call you. Are you there? I have returned. I am here again. I have shaken the dust of all the lands from my feet, and I have come to you. I am with you. And that's from that's the opening lines of Carl Jung's The Red Book, which was published posthumously, and that's the opening of the book. It's unbelievable,
Fabulous,
unbelievable.
Yeah,
but I think it's a good invocation for what you get into, and I'll let you talk about that a little more, of course, because you're the one who wrote it, in a second. But I wanted to talk about you. In the book, you talk about this as an endeavor that found you. And again, I'm going to go back to Tolkien, because the story goes that he wrote down on a blank page of an exam booklet that he was grading papers, and he wrote down on this exam booklet, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, and he didn't know what a hobbit was.
Wow.
And that's the open.
Amazing.
You didn't know that story?
That.
Yeah.
No,
so
I love that.
And so he didn't know what a hobbit was, and that's the opening line of what became The Hobbit. And then there's a tremendous shift in tone and intensity and detail, and kind of just this blossoming of this creative world that he connects into and offers from The Hobbit to Lord of the Rings. But that was the start of his journey. That was the as you said, the endeavor that found him. So I'm curious about what prompted you to say this endeavor found me. How did that work out?
You know what? This is another great question, because now that you ask me and I think about it, it's almost as if most, not all, but most of the things I've written have found me. Long before I wrote this book of nonfiction, the first screenplay, I never knew I was going to be, wanted to be a writer. I guess, there was a time where I thought it would be nice to be able to write something, but as a kid, I only aspired to be a lawyer. That's what I wanted to do. And then I went to university and I read a little bit of law, and I was like, this is going to be a lot of work.
That was enough.
And I thought, I'll tell you what, I'll go the business route. And so I ended up majoring in marketing, and then I studied some more, and I did a graduate degree in strategic marketing, and then I went to work in advertising and marketing and banking, and that was my world. That's what I did. I was a business guy. I used to make money for my clients and for the companies that I worked in, and art and culture were these like you said, abstract things, and writing was not something that was really an important thing to me, but it was always there. It kept creeping up on me, and I can remember I signed up for a creative writing course many years ago, and I went along, and I think I attended a few of them, and it never really thrilled me. I didn't maybe it was the instructor or whatever, but I left it sort of by the wayside, and I just continued being the guy who worked in banking and marketing, and but I would every now and again I'd had this idea for, like, let's call it a scene, right, of this story, and so I'd note them down, and this happened for years. This went on for years. I would come home from work, and I'd be watching a game, or whatever I was doing, and I'd get this thing, and so I would write it down, and I wrote this down for years, and there came to a point where I had enough of these little musings, these little scenes, that it was like a literal, you need to put this stuff together. It found me, and that became my first screenplay. And that launched me into, training to be a screenwriter. And that happened with my second screenplay. And it happened with the novel that I'm working on right now. And the book that you want to talk about, my nonfiction, Letters to My Future Children, was, again, I was in that period of time where I was kind of rediscovering who I was, what I wanted to be, who I wanted to be, and what I wanted to do. And I thought I would write a book of essays, maybe as someone new to a new country, somebody navigating a career change, wrestling with it, discovering his own identity. And so it found me, they found me. And I started writing, and I couldn't write these essays. And it was at the same time as I discovered PRS. And they just wouldn't work. And I kept asking myself, why would anybody read these? Who would care? Like, who am I to be writing an essay anyway? Like, how dare I? What kind of audacity is this? And then even if I did write these essays on whatever, on my worldview, and what is my worldview? Like, who would care? Who would care about reading them? And I can remember very clearly sitting in our old kitchen in the apartment that we sold one afternoon, wondering how I want to do this, but I don't know how to do it. And most writers have had that moment. And I had this brainwave, and my wife and I had talked about having kids in the future, but it wasn't a thing. It wasn't something that we were actively working on. And I just thought, what if I wrote these things to some future children of mine? Because I could force them to read it, right? They'd have to read the thing that their dad wrote. And that was like a breakthrough moment for me. And the essays then, these proposed essays became letters. And I thought I would write just small letters to my kids, whoever they are, whenever they are born, right? If they are ever born. But that's how I'll tackle this project. And it was like the switch flicked, and I wrote them in. I wrote something like 32 letters or something, in 6 weeks. They just went. Yeah. They just poured out of me, and I was astonished, and it really was me articulating how I felt about the world, and how I perceived the world, and it's still that. It's just still that, and then when you frame that project as Letters to Future Children, it became for me a way of transmitting all the things that I've learned, all the mistakes that I've made. And I thought, if I do have kids, then maybe this will be like, give them a head start,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
because
Well,
I was, I was into decades of life and having to wrestle through articulating and discovering all of this stuff. And I thought, I wish someone had given me this kind of stuff when I was a kid, and that was the intention, and
yeah.
that's what it's turned out to be. And of course, as you said, so many people have read them and said this applies to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say people, I mean adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not really written to little children. And in fact, I don't think little children would understand them
Right.
or appreciate them, right?
Right.
Uh, so I really appreciate you speaking so positively about it and the letters, and giving me the opportunity to remember
Yeah.
that process.
Well, if my memory serves me correctly, there were many times that Frodo had said, "I can't handle this. Who am I to do this? Handle this responsibility?" Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but again, one of the great themes of Lord of the Rings is they're all the characters are struggling with this notion of who am I to do this great work. And
Right,
the great
right.
answer, the book provides is, it doesn't matter. The wizard has knocked on the door, and it is time for the great
Yes.
work. I think Greg mentioned in his he wrote an introduction to the book, Dr. Sawyer,
Yeah, he
and
did.
one of the
That's right.
things he captured in the introduction so beautifully was calling it a completely authentic work. And so I was thinking about that phrase, and it's not so much of our culture thinks authentic is like we have to get to the real thing or it's original, and everything has been a mix, mishmash of all these cultures and all this
Yeah.
stuff. So it's kind of like a cultural thing, like this is the quote unquote the real. But Greg meant it in a way of the language of the soul. It's not
Yeah.
it's not intellectual in an off-putting way. It's not egotistical, though it is full of a kind of ego coming to terms with himself and learning about life and wanting to share what he has discovered. And I appreciated that because it really reflects time and thought. So often things that are missed, as much as I love blogs, as much as I love discussions even like this, there's nothing like time and thought. I mean, that's how we express love. The time that we think about something or envision something or imagine something, the thoughts we devote to people. Just as soon as I'm done with this, I'll take a photo of some holiday decorations and send them to my fiance. These little thoughts. And so what really impressed me about the book is that's all in there, and it's not hiding. It's a very vulnerable book. It's not hiding behind big big words or name dropping every 5 minutes about Socrates said this. But they're in there. These great influences that from all of your life and also from your learning are in there. But it's a very genuine, vulnerable book written in, I think, is the language of love, but you may say the language of the soul, or trying to reach that level. And another great term from Paulo Coelho, from The Alchemist, the language of the soul. But
Yeah.
so I just wanted to compliment you on that. But also I wanted to talk a little bit more
Thank you.
about the letter form, because I love how you talked, and this should encourage all of us with our stories, whatever they may be, that sometimes it's finding the avenue in. And you chose a very, for me, an incredible form. Not too long ago, I read Plutarch wrote this just heartbreaking letter to his wife. And Plutarch, of course, made famous by writing biographies that paired larger than life ancient Greek figures with Roman figures. So Alexander the Great, Caesar, and he kind of promoted this great man move history, not as an academician, but kind of as a thinker. And he writes this letter. You got to read it if you haven't. He writes his letter to his wife. I think it's called Letter to His Wife.
Okay.
And they had just lost their 2-year-old child. And he writes this, I think it's 40-page letter trying to reach her. And And so there's something about that relationship. For him, it was writing to somebody, or you writing to a future somebody. And there's something about that immediacy that makes, that's why humans, we crave dialogue. And we kind of
Yeah.
need another to spur us forward. Again, thinking of fellowship, right? In a way, the letter is an act of fellowship, of offering, of trying to interacting in dialogue. And so I love that you chose that form. I mean, you cover a lot of ground. Sexuality, gender, race, of course, very important right now, but also, things like the good life and suffering. But I love that it comes from a person who's just trying to get to another person, or future children, but it could be the reader. And
Yes.
it makes it a very, not only is it written well, but I think that really generates the love that comes forth, and it makes it a very impactful read. But I'm just curious about your thoughts of the letter, of that letter form, either as you were doing it or if that's what as you were writing it. I know you talked about how you came upon it, but is this kind? Am I way off base from the writer point of view?
It's interesting. No, it's really interesting because and I don't specifically want to talk about my book or be over dramatic about my book, but I'm grateful that you referenced Plutarch's letter, which I haven't read, and now I will read. But the form, despite writing to hypothetical people, right? My children were not born then,
right,
or conceived or anything, but the idea that they exist was important because, as I continually reference, the perspective of the soul, that my children existed as souls, right? They were present and accessible, even though they weren't in earthly form, right?
Right.
And so, writing a letter to someone really, it's an act of love.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so personal. It's a conversation, and it felt like I was writing to not really small children, but just these. I think I was writing to sort of in my mind they were like teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
On the cusp,
Mm-hmm.
on the cusp of going out into the world, and I wanted to say, I know you're about to launch off into the world. Here's some stuff that you're going to need because I love you already.
Yeah. Well, when they're middle-aged, they'll still be your children.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people forget that Frodo was middle-aged. He wasn't a teenager.
Wow. Right. Yes, you're right.
Yeah. So, that's an interesting twist. that who knows how many times they'll pick it up and when it'll speak to them in that way. But yeah, they'll be 40 and still your children.
Yeah. And I think that, to answer the question, the form allows a parent to have that conversation. And as you say, I didn't want to preach, I didn't want to pontificate, and force this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm so pleased that's how they worked out, and I was very conscious of that because that's the worst thing, nagging people into thinking something or feeling something, and that wasn't the intention. The intention was, this is the stuff I've learned, I'm sharing with you.
Yes.
And it would be great if you could do the same for yourself, right? It's an invocation, as you say.
Yes.
The books, all the letters are an invocation to this is what I think about sex and gender and race and suffering, right? I'm telling you, and I would like you to discover what you think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I was talking with a friend of mine a couple of years ago, and we had this long back and forth on text. And at some point I said to him, our job as parents is to give our children choices, not make them for them. Mm-hmm. And that's my philosophy. I wanted to give my kids, I wrote these letters, not just for my children, but for the reader, right? To say, I don't want you to think the things that I think. I just want you to think about the things that I think.
Yeah.
And find them for yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm giving you the choice. I'm encouraging you to make a choice.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the feedback has been phenomenal. I'm really pleased.
Well, and I like that how you said, it's your point of view. I think you said, I wrote it, or I'm saying that, but that's also diminishing, because we tend to think of the I as a very shallow creature in our commodified and superficial, society. But the I that is coming from, the I you're speaking about, is the conversations you've had, the books you've read, the
Yes.
impact of PRS, and that's what comes through. And there's such a beautiful word that's not used nearly enough, except in a related noun, and that's to profess. You have the professor, one who professes, but it's something where time and thought and all those readings and conversations get infused, and you're professing and offering. And it's a great work. I just love so much about it. At one point you talked about, human perspective is one of suffocation, and the soul's perspective is one of liberation. And there's so many things to ponder. It's one of those books that you could read rather quickly, but you can also read very slowly. And there's so many things like that have just stuck with me. I recently reread it. It was pretty amazing to read during this pandemic. But
I bet, yeah.
But I love how all of this seeking shows up through the person of you as the writer, and you're professing and offering something that is important, if anything, as a reminder, as an opportunity, as an encounter with somebody, which is how we learn. So yeah, it's great. One other thing I wanted to ask you about was, you had talked about it in the book. You have two great themes running through a bunch of the letters, and one is the theme of Maya, illusion, and the other one you write about really well is amnesia. So this kind of like this constant, the Gnostics would call it the archons, right, of Maya and amnesia, taking us away from ourselves. And you write about that beautifully. Yeah. And wow, we are certainly in that situation right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's great to receive positive praise, and I know I think it might be due for me to reread it as well.
Yeah, I know.
Amazing.
You're like, wow, that's pretty interesting. I'll have to. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Well, that's true. When you get into that visionary space, you talked about writing 32 letters in 6 weeks. You're just receiving and transmitting.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
Yeah. You are reading it as you as the reader would not be you as the writer. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. And just to touch on, Maya and amnesia, so pivotal in the human experience. Those two, the idea of living life in an illusory environment, and the idea of not remembering that we are much deeper and much more profound beings than we allow ourselves to recognize. And I think you can. I think it's better that we do rediscover those things from time to time, rather than sort of print them out and put them on a wall, because then they become part of the wallpaper and you just walk right past them, right? Even the message, as profound as it is,
yes,
it just gets lost in everyday life. It becomes the illusion, right? It becomes part of the illusion, and to rediscover it from time to time, in moments of struggle and suffering, it's much more impactful, and it helps you redirect and maybe sometimes get back on track. Mm-hmm. But yeah, life absolutely is an illusion, and I forget that.
Yeah. Well, let me try this out on you, because when I first read your book, I actually had the quote. You have an amazing quote, and you're talking about this book you wrote about a year and a half ago. And you talked about wanting to share a philosophy that is lived as much as it is
Yeah.
learned, and that experiential aspect is one of the themes through your book. And I mean, it's amazing. And the quote is, you're talking about this philosophy is befitting an age of disruption. It is radical. It demands the disruption of what we have known and done for centuries. It demands we rethink our approach to life itself. Easier said than done, but essential nonetheless, given the state of the world we live in. And when I first encountered this, I obviously thought of all the upheaval and chaos right now because of lockdowns, economic disparity, uncertainty. And of course that is a great disruption and a great opportunity in a way,
Mm-hmm.
as light comes through the cracks. But then I thought, when I reread your quote, and I actually reread it, as I was writing it down, I'm like, wait a minute, I have this totally wrong. Because on the one hand, you're thinking this great disruption is offering new opportunities, which I think is true. But what stuck out at me was for centuries. And that's what made me think, hey, wait a minute. The life before the disruption was also an opportunity and also even more of a dangerous illusion. And this is also more of an illusion than that one. So the same principles at work. And we can get lost in thinking about how that's such a great opportunity because this is disruption.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
There's an interesting play of thinking something is being revealed of the world that's still of the world, and therefore not necessarily of a higher experience of it. I just thought that was interesting because the for centuries jumped out at me. So I was wondering what you thought about that kind of situation when you think about disruption as an opportunity or disruption as it's just the same thing. It's the same Maya. You're just getting lost differently, or you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting that, that first draft of letters I wrote in January, early 2017.
Oh, okay.
Right. So,
wow.
So 3.5, nearly 4 years ago. Right. And,
right.
Trump had just gotten in.
Mm-hmm.
Trump had just got in.
Mm-hmm.
And we were still in the old world, right? It was still Obama's world.
Mm-hmm.
It was Obama's America.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the reference was absolutely not to the chaos that we've endured because it hadn't happened at that point.
Right.
Yeah. And so it reinforces what you're saying, which is that this Maya is eternal.
Right. Right.
It's age old.
Right.
It's always been there.
Right.
And you know what? It only becomes new because we discover it or we recognize it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's always there.
Yes.
It's always there. It's always been there.
Yeah.
And it's there for every generation to discover.
Yeah.
Or every individual to discover at whatever age in life you discover it. But it's a perennial, the mask of illusion is on all the time. And, we swim through it, oblivious.
Yes. And even the subtle things like, you think of the Russian Revolution, right? I mean, that euphoria of overturning something is its own mask, right? They think they were building something and they're destroying something, and you kind of get lost. And as a good Gnostic, I'm really in love with your theme of amnesia in the book. And another great letter that you should read. It's not a letter, but it's a letter that appears in a story along the lines of Plutarch. But there's an old Gnostic text. It's really the monomyth of the Gnostic worldview, and it's called the hymn of the Robe of Glory. So hymn like the song, a hymn of the Robe of Glory. And Dr. Stephan Heller, who is a longtime lecturer at PRS, and thankfully he's still around lecturing, on his channel Ecclesia Gnostica, he just did a 3-part interpretation of the hymn of the Robe of Glory. Well, it's about 2,000 years old, and I won't go through the whole thing, but it's a gorgeous text, even in English. And so this guy goes down and gets lost in Egypt, and he's royalty and forgets it. And the king and the queen are like, we got to get through to this guy, and Egypt is kind of the material world. He's just kind of lost his task. So they send him a letter reminding him that, you're of noble birth and you have this great task, which I don't want to give away the story. It's not that long. And so there's a beautiful scene where the letter is sent down to him, brought to him by an eagle. But there's a line in the hymn of Robe of Glory where it says, the letter was written on his heart.
Wow.
So it's this beautiful representation of the inner and the outer, of reminding of where we can shake that amnesia, get in touch with the task. And you do some of that as well about these moments.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that. It's reminded me of a couple of things, and I will look into that. But this idea of amnesia it's also very prosaic, right?
Mm-hmm.
We forget on a daily. I do. You'll hear. You've been saying these wonderful things about these letters that I wrote, and I even say in one of them that don't think that I've sort of transcended to some spiritual being. Right? I'm not.
Right.
And now you're making me. You're reminding me that, God, I really should read the book again because, I've been lost this year in the illusion, right? In the disruption.
Yes.
I've been swept away by it, and we all have in our own ways. Some of us more than others, but we all have, and we forget. We really forget. And it was really empowering to me when I wrote those letters and articulated that, more than anything else, I am an immortal soul, right? And I needed to remember that. And that is so liberating. That was so freeing. Mm-hmm. And that's the point of incarnation or reincarnation is actually to swim in the illusion and to traverse the struggle and the suffering. And hopefully at some point you will remember, that we are very special beings and we're on a journey here of growth. And we get lost because we are so involved in daily life. It's just so easy. It's so easy to forget that we are these transcendent beings on a journey of growth, and we believe the illusion, and we get lost in the illusion, and we get swept away by it. And you talked about the story. The Egypt story, and it reminded me of the story of the Ramayana, where Prince Rama goes he's exiled for 14 years, and and then he's returned, and he's rightfully enthroned as the king, but it's only later in his life that he realizes that actually he's an incarnation of God. He's a God. He's not a king, right? He's not just a king. He wasn't just a prince, but he's a God.
Right.
He's God incarnate. And he didn't know. Right. He'd forgotten. Right. Because he was incarnated.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful way of understanding this, that it's not just as we're all mortal. Even the gods, when they incarnate, right, become mortal. And it's easy to forget and be swept away by the illusion.
Yeah. And what I loved about your book, in addition to what you were saying about the realization you had of you and sounds like Kierkegaard. It's both yourself, but also a relationship between yourself relating to itself as a soul. But the other thing that you emphasize that comes through as a theme is the great. I don't want to say task because too many people think of that as like a chore. It's more of what the alchemist said. The great work. Yes. And that's a great reminder in your book as well. And this is where Jon Kabat-Zinn, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, he has a great quote where he talks about if it doesn't make you feel more alive, it's too small for you. And some of these things, like, I don't know, Twitter, for example, it may feel good, I don't know, getting an argument or whatever, but it's not making you feel more alive. So therefore, it's too small for you. And that was a quote that came to mind as reading your book, because these are the experiences that writers and thinkers have and are sharing that make us feel more alive, and therefore they're not too small for us. They're worth our time to seek, through them, as we get reminded of and get encouraged for, the great work.
Yeah, and the great work it's a much better way of describing it, because I call it I'm very sort of blunt about it, and I call it the struggle, which is has a lot of negative connotation, and in many ways rightly so, but who doesn't struggle? Who doesn't?
Right.
And that's the point. And that was the point that I was trying to make as well in the letters, is that the thing that's hard, right? The thing that you don't want to do is where the growth is, right? That's where the gold is,
right?
And that's the work. That's what you need to embrace.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing coincidence, but becoming a parent is both an amazing, incredible thing, but also, the worst. it's so difficult. Being a parent is so hard.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure your soon-to-be 3-year-old is not impressed with all of the work you put into those letters at the moment. You are challenged in different ways. Vulnerabilities are exposed.
And I have to remind myself, this is my struggle now. Yeah. Parenting is the journey.
Yeah.
And as much as there are, many times during the day where you think, I don't want to do this is too hard. It's too much. I just need you to eat your breakfast. Just please eat your breakfast, right? And then I have to, and I'm getting better at it. But it's almost 3 years in, right? That I'm only just feel that I can say that I'm getting better at reminding myself that this is the work. Being a parent is meant to be hard, but it's making me a better person. Yeah. And I might not see it yet, but yeah.
Isn't it?
So embrace it.
Yeah, and at some point, I'm sure you will use every ounce of intellectual capacity, a complete dedication to the power of myth to move people's lives, as you work to have this 5-year-old put on her shoes. You know what I mean? You're gonna try every possible scenario, and at the end, maybe she will, maybe she won't. But
maybe she won't.
Yeah.
No, mine won't. No, we already know who she is. Well, she's absolutely going to say no.
When you were talking about you have to reread your own book, I was thinking, what if you're the child?
Wow! Oh my God, that's an amazing observation. Amazing. Thank you for that.
We're all the fathers to, I guess, future selves that we want to do. Yes. In addition to that, so it would be interesting to reread it as the recipient of the letters.
Yeah,
the child.
That's a great exercise.
New self. Yeah.
That's a great exercise.
So to recap, a couple things. You mentioned Virgin Mary, and I just have to point out I'm not too far away from her house. Where she eventually ascended to heaven. It's near Ephesus, the great ancient city, the second largest ruin site in outside Pompeii. It's not too far from Izmir, so you have to come to southwestern Turkey. It's unbelievable.
Absolutely,
in a lot of cultural interchange here, and also I just wanted to. I was going to close with the quote from Tolkien about "Not all who wander are lost," but I'll let that go.
I have it on my desk, actually.
Yeah, not all who wander are lost. Oh, it's such a. I could read that book again and again. There was a couple I met in Russia who were reading it to each other about 3 pages, about 3 pages a night, and they were forcing themselves to only do 3 because they didn't want it to end. So they're going through the whole trilogy, and they hadn't read it yet. It was their first time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
Wow, that's going to take a while, but what a pleasure that would be.
Yeah, they probably gave up on that, but that was their start, because it's hard to only do 3 pages. But I just wanted to conclude with a quote of yours, where you say, "It takes time to learn the great secrets of life. If only I had started seeking them sooner." Great.
Yes.
Great stuff. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's about an hour and 20 minutes or so. I personally, I really appreciate it. I'm really energized. It was a joy to reconnect with you and to talk about your work and your seeking and your life so far. What is there anything you how should people keep up with you or connect with you? Is there a website, or I know you're working on a novel.
Yeah,
Are you going to be teaching at PRS again? Anything that people should be aware of before we go?
yeah. There's a bunch of things that I mean, this year's been a bit of well, mostly a write-off because
Yeah.
pandemic closed down lots of things, but notably for me, it closed down daycare, so I became a full-time parent
Right.
again, and so it's been incredibly challenging, an incredibly challenging time for me. So I haven't been able to produce as much as I would like to have done, but I was just thinking about what I have achieved this year. You know, it's December, we come to the end of the year, and for several years now, I've been keeping just a little log of the stuff that I do each year or would like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I managed, by somehow I managed to write 30,000 words this year and complete
Great.
the first part of my novel.
Great. Congratulations.
So that's like 72,000. Yeah, about 72,000 in total for part one, of which 30,000 I wrote this year, sort of by scrimping and stealing an hour here and there.
Great.
And I've been feeling really down that I haven't been able to write as much as I wanted to. But 30,000 is a good achievement under the circumstances. So I feel pleased that I managed to achieve that. And so the novel is underway. It's an epic, and it's unashamedly a mythology. It's
Great.
it's a mythological telling of the rise and fall of the American Empire.
Oh wow!
And again, it found me. I started writing it. You know, when I was on my graduate program in London, and I was doing all this academic reading and writing, I was really missing creative writing.
Yes.
And I didn't have time to undertake a big project, but I had this idea for a short film that I wanted to write, and I thought, okay, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to make this short film, so why don't I convert the story into a novella? So I started writing a novella, and it has now transformed into this 3-part epic mythology, unashamedly mythological approach to America, a mythological
Beautiful
exploration of America, and it's going to be distill everything that
Wonderful.
I've been doing in the last few years.
Well, I can't wait to read it. Thank you so much for the insight. We're steeped in myth, as you know very well, and we're a myth-making machine, and it's really intriguing. And congratulations on writing. I mean, some days I can't even write an email, so everyone is kind of in a fog right now. So that's a nice little jolt of inspiration to leave it on. And I'll just remind you about Letters from Father Christmas by Tolkien.
Yes.
There's also an audio version with an amazing reader. An amazing reader. You may be able to find that around, but it's pretty special because I imagine the genius Tolkien was every year sitting down to write the new story, and these plot lines go on like a year to year. You know, that whole engine, that whole talent he has, but there's still that joy of writing. It's a Christmas gift. It's a joy that he's capturing, and definitely check it out. So I want to wish you and your family happy holidays. Thank your wife for letting me steal you for a little while today, and your daughter.
You so much.
And have a great celebration as we get through this final descent to the bottom and start to rise with the days getting longer with the sun, and we'll participate in that ancient move where the life starts to return. So have a great holiday season. Say hello to everyone at PRS if you ever see them. Maybe you won't even see them before I see them, but I hope we're back up and running soon. And I really encourage people to visit prs.org, sign up for events, discussions, courses, and of course you can visit the bookstore or make a donation. So thank you so much, Satya. Have a great new year and a blessed 2021.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much, James. If you wanted to, if you're on Twitter, you can find me at I am Satya Indra.
Hmm.
Uh, my website is ahigherfrequency.com. And I do try to get onto campus at PRS, once or twice a month. It's closed, but the library is open. Sometimes the bookshop is obviously open, so I am around. And yeah, very excited to get back to Tuesday nights.
Yeah.
And thank
Well,
you so much for this opportunity, and a happy Christmas and a very happy Merry New Year
yeah.
for 2021. Hopefully things improve
Well,
in
yeah.
the world.
Yeah. We're at the part of the story where the fellowship is splintered. We're off all on
Yes,
our own, but we will return. We will all come
yes.
together again at Rivendell, PRS, and celebrate and share. So thank you again for doing this, and happy holidays. Have a great New Year.
And you too. All the best. Take care.